Hi everyone. So let's go ahead and finish up this section 6 that we are looking at with this whole regulation of blood pressure and take a look at hormonal regulation of blood pressure. So the hormones that are going to be involved in blood pressure are, we'll look at epinephrine and norepinephrine, and then we'll take a look at angiotensin, ADH, and aldosterone. We'll take a look at how they all are going to kind of go in and increase blood pressure. And we're going to take a look at one single hormone that's going to go in and work to decrease blood pressure, which is your atrial natriuretic peptide. Now, you should be familiar with all of these. Either we have just mentioned them, like this one. I only mentioned this one in the endocrine chapter, and I talked about what organ secretes it, or we looked at it a little bit more as far as their functions. Like we talked about the function of ADH and aldosterone, but not too heavily. So what these do is they are going to go in and work a little bit differently than neural regulation. Remember, with neural regulation, it was mainly working at affecting the heart, so affecting cardiac output, but it was also going in and affecting resistance in the blood vessels. So these are going to work. You still have resistance, so we are still going to see some vasoconstriction, vasodilation, but the way that it affects blood pressure, another way is through blood volume. Because we already talked about with blood volume, when you have an increase in blood volume, you have an increase in blood pressure. When you have a decrease in blood volume, you have a decrease in blood pressure. So the way to regulate blood volume, the main way is going to be through urine output. So the more you urinate, then that can decrease blood volume. If you don't urinate as often, that can go in and increase blood volume. But also altering fluid intake, going in and encouraging you to drink more fluids, which will eventually get into the bloodstream. So let's go ahead and start with epinephrine, norepinephrine. Really what this does is it enhances the sympathetic response. So you get an increase in cardiac output, and you have an increase in vasoconstriction. This is one that really doesn't have much to do with blood volume, and snuck this in with the cardiac output. So, but just make sure you know that when these are working as hormones, they will go in and enhance sympathetic response. Let's take a look at these other ones. You have three main ones, and we'll talk about angiotensin too in a second. But aldosterone and ADH, these two are going to help maintain blood volume, and that's going to, or elevate blood volume, and that's going to help elevate blood pressure. Now remember aldosterone, right? It is secreted from the adrenal gland, the adrenal cortex, and there's going to be several stimuli, and we'll get more into these when we look at fluid and electrolytes in that chapter and urinary system. So we'll look more at some of the different stimuli. But one of the things that causes aldosterone to be secreted is angiotensin 2, and which we'll look at here in a second. So anytime that aldosterone is going to be secreted, what it does is it causes more absorption of sodium. So that means that sodium goes into the bloodstream, there's the absorption of sodium. So the sodium will go into the bloodstream, and anytime that it does that, water is going to follow. So do you see how you're increasing blood volume with aldosterone because of this sodium water that's going into the bloodstream? Increased blood volume increases blood pressure. Another thing, and that in turn is going to decrease the loss of water in the urine. So instead of course, water going out in the urine, it's going to go into the bloodstream. So this is all working there right in the kidneys. We will get into those little tiny details of how it's working in the kidneys when we get to the kidneys, right? Now let's take a look at how ADH works. This is also going to help maintain or elevate blood pressure. So some of the things that stimulate ADH is low blood volumes. So let's say hemorrhaging. Hemorrhaging can be a stimulus for ADH secretion. Also, look, another angiotensin 2 can also tell ADH to be secreted. So again, you guys remember ADH? ADH was secreted from the posterior pituitary gland, right? Made in the hypothalamus, and then it's going to be stored and secreted from the posterior pituitary gland. What it does is it is basically going to cause water conservation in the body. So instead of us urinating out water, it is going to increase absorption of water. And when it says increase absorption of water, that means that it's going not in the urine, but going into the bloodstream. If we can get it into the bloodstream, more water in the bloodstream means that we can increase blood volume, and that is going to mean that we increase blood pressure. Another interesting thing that it does is it helps stimulate thirst. So the thirst center of the hypothalamus, and that's going to encourage us to take in fluid. So that way we can take in fluid, we don't urinate it out, stays in our bloodstream. That's going to help elevate blood volume as well. And look at this. It is a powerful, in large amounts, it can be a powerful vasoconstrictor, but this is usually what happens with hemorrhaging in extreme low blood volume situations. Let's take a look at the one hormone that's going to go in and decrease blood pressure. So this is going to do it by encouraging, I guess urination is one of the big things here. So look at that. Atrial natriuretic peptide. This is telling you where it's being secreted from. It's being secreted from the heart, yes. It does actually have something to do with sodium, but we're not going to get into that in this chapter. We will get into it in the urinary fluid and electrolytes chapter. What you need to know is the way that it goes in to help decrease blood volume is it's going to encourage urine output. Again, increasing urine output means drop in blood volume, which means a drop in blood pressure. The thing that stimulates the ANP release in the first place is when those atrial walls are going to stretch because there's too much blood in there, so an increase in blood volume. So it's working to help decrease it. So that's the one hormone that's going to go in and encourage a decrease in blood volume. Here's that chart I showed way back with local blood flow, but I wanted to look at this here because look, you do have some vasodilators. Look, ANP is a vasodilator. So we'll talk about angiotensin here in a second. Look, there's aldosterone and ANP are going to be vasoconstrictors, especially in large amounts. So that's something important to note, that these hormones, when they are secreted in large amounts, we'll talk about angiotensin too in a second, that they can be very powerful vasoconstrictors or vasodilators. So they're going to work that way as well. Kind of interesting. So let's take a look. I've saved this whole renin-angiotensin system here towards the end of this section because this is going to be more of a long-term mechanism. Everything that we've been talking about so far have been short-term mechanisms, but these are going to be more long-term mechanisms. You don't really have to worry about the little technicalities that are happening here about how with angiotensinogen, this is something that it's an inactive hormone secreted from the liver. So renin is going to go in and convert this inactive hormone into this thing called angiotensin 1, which is another inactive hormone. And then you have something called ACE, which is angiotensin converting enzyme. That is going to convert angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. So you got this whole little cascade of events that's going to work to eventually get this hormone activated. It's so interesting how you have one secreted from the liver, and then you have one secreted from the kidney, and then you have something secreted from the lungs that are all going in to do this big, huge regulating process that we have here. But again, don't worry about all of these little tiny things that are happening. This is what we really want to concentrate on. And this too. I mean, it's really important to make sure we understand what is going on. Why is this system even being stimulated? So it's usually because of low blood pressure is going to be one of the key things that is going to set this whole string of events off. And what angiotensin II does, the way that it increases blood pressure is it is going to cause vasoconstriction. We saw that. Look at that. There it is. So again, vasoconstriction is going to cause an increase in resistance, which, remember, your straw, right, is going to cause an increase in blood pressure. But it's also going to work by stimulating the thirst center. So it's going to make you thirsty. It's going to cause you to seek out some kind of fluid so you can get it into your body and get it here into the bloodstream. And that is going to increase blood volume, which helps increase blood pressure. And we want to keep it inside of the bloodstream, right? Yes, we want to keep it inside the bloodstream. So we don't want to urinate it out. So that's another thing that it does, is it decreases urine formation. So we can keep that fluid into the blood vessels, increase blood volume, increase blood pressure. Another thing that's not on here that angiotensin II does is it is going to cause ADH and aldosterone to be secreted. So not only do you have, these mechanisms working, but you're also going to have these mechanisms working at the same time. So you see how this is more of a long-term mechanism to help increase blood volume. So this is really important after blood loss. If an individual has lost a large amount of blood, this is coming in a little bit later on to help get that blood volume up to eventually get that blood pressure back up. So that's your short-term, long-term neural and hormonal regulation. So usually what happens, you have an integration of all these variables that are influencing blood pressure, right? You have resistance, you have cardiac output, you have blood volume, and they're all going to try and make sure that blood pressure stays at that 120/80. So this slide is just going through and summing up all of the different variables that are going to go in and affect blood pressure, cardiac output, peripheral resistance, and blood volume. So the next section that we're going to be taking a look at is how blood is going to be distributed to different parts of the body in times of need. So until next time.